class. I'm Simon Van de Pass. I just arrived here from the 1600s via time portal, and let me tell you, a lot has changed. Oh, what's that you're looking at? Oh, this right here. Ah, yes. I remember drawing that. The portrait of Matoaka, John Rolfe's wife. I haven't seen that picture since John Smith published it in his book, The General History of Virginia, New England, and the Summer Isles in 1624. Although I originally drew this portrait in 1616, shortly after Matoaka arrived in London from the New World. Sadly, she died just 1 year later, in 1617. Now you're probably wondering who Matoaka is. Well, you've probably heard of her before. See, in this day and age, she's most commonly known as Pocahontas, although in her lifetime, she was also known as Rebecca Rolfe. Matoaka was an indigenous woman from the Powhatan Nation nearby the Jamestown settlement in Virginia, in what you guys in this day and age would call the United States of America. She was born around 1595, although the exact date isn't really known. Her father was the chief of the nation, and as you can see in the portrait, I labeled her as daughter to the mighty Prince Powhatan. Oh, what was that? Why did I name her as Rebecca John Rolfe's wife? Well, let me get to that. The Powhatan peoples and the Jamestown colonists had a complicated relationship. Jamestown was the first permanent English settlement established in North America. And when the colonists first came, they relied on the Powhatan peoples for food, knowledge of the landscape, and survival. In the first few years the colonists spent in Jamestown, they saw their populations plummet, largely due to disease, starvation, and the elements. However, as they began to adjust to the landscape, the settlement began to produce surpluses and profits, which saw the colonist population begin to grow. However, as the colony grew, relationships with the Powhatans got increasingly complicated. The two groups saw rising conflicts, which became more and more violent. These conflicts saw many casualties on both sides, and the burning down of multiple indigenous villages. In addition to this, the Powhatan people saw their own population decline dramatically, largely as a result of epidemic diseases. This was disastrous for the Powhatan, as the colonists grew to outnumber them, and thus gained an upper hand in this already tumultuous relationship. They took aggressive strategies to assure colonial expansion, which saw a focus on assimilation of indigenous peoples, largely centered around converting them to Christianity. Here's where Matoaka comes into the picture. She was captured by the colonists in 1613 during a particularly intense period of conflict, and was then held in captivity for ransom. She remained in captivity until her marriage to an English colonist by the name of John Rolfe, hence the labeling on the picture. Following her marriage, she converted to Christianity. This marriage was a political one. It was meant to bring peace between the Powhatan and the colonists. However, this peace was short-lived. Conflict had begun again in less than a year, and both sides saw raids and sieges. The colonialists began to expand, and as their population ballooned, it became increasingly difficult for the Powhatan to maintain their land. Colonialism was thus incredibly violent. Matoaka thus represents European attempts to justify colonialism despite its violence. She symbolized the ability of indigenous peoples to assimilate into European culture, despite the fact that her assimilation was forced as she was held in captivity. Furthermore, consent around both her marriage and Christian conversion cannot be confirmed. Regardless, she has come to represent justified assimilation, and therefore her image, as painted by both myself and the colonists, justifies the violence and dispossession of colonialism through depicting her as a complete departure from her own indigeneity and as fully assimilated. So you're probably wondering, why is this important in 2020? Here's the thing. Matoaka is still being used as a symbol for the justification of colonialism, as colonialism is an ongoing process. In the hundreds of years since her death, media has been made which promotes a false narrative that Matawaca was peacefully assimilated into European culture, and this paints assimilation as a positive thing. So many of you have probably seen the Disney film Pocahontas. When I heard about this film, I couldn't believe it was about Matawaca. The Disney version of her story leans heavily on false narratives of Matawaca as a willing participant in colonialism, and also carries many harmful narratives which promote European lifestyles as superior to indigenous lifestyles, painting Matawaca and the Powhatans as savages. Other examples of this are seen in modern media, such as in poetry, public history exhibits. For example, in Virginia, there are reenactments of Pocahontas and John Wolfe's marriage. These reenactments completely leave out the fact that this wedding would not have been possible without Pocahontas' capture and time in captivity. Overall, when I created this portrait of Matawaca all those hundreds of years ago in 1616, I could not have ever predicted how effective it would have been in creating Matawaca as such a strong symbol for the justification of colonialism and assimilation. Alas, that is the symbol with which she has become, despite the injustice and inaccuracy of it all. Anyways, I've got to head back to the 1600s. I've got some portraits of the British monarchy to finish. Goodbye, class.